Okay, welcome back to Cloud Conversations. This is episode 21. I'm Peter Rising, and as ever on Cloud, Rue and Pete, Cloud Conversations with Rue and Pete, get the name of the show right. I'm joined by my fabulous co-host, Rue Campbell. How are you today, Rue?
Yeah, not bad, mate. Not bad. It's been a insanely busy week, but that kind of just summarizes what life in our little Microsoft 365 bubble is like just now. The pace is just really picking up. Finding that as folks are moving out of lockdown, going back to business as usual, things are just getting busier and busier. You know, a lot of the business decisions that were being held off are now, people are starting to get into them now. They've got some cash coming in. But anyway, that's enough of the boring stuff out of the way. I've got the pleasure of introducing this episode's guest, Mr. Paul Tozer. Paul's a good old friend of myself and your YouTube, Pete, obviously, you know, kind of going back to really the early days of my consulting career. Paul was kind of right there at the beginning of it as we both entered a company at around the same time. But anyway, so Paul is a cloud solutions architect focusing on Azure. And in my brain, he's the go-to guy for anything to do with VDI in the Microsoft cloud. So, Paul, thanks for joining us. And how are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Thanks for having me on the show. I don't feel worthy to be on it, but you know, it's great to be on. You know, enjoying stuff.
You'll fit right in because everybody says that. Nobody thinks they deserve to be here, so you're in good company. We don't feel we deserve to be doing it, so don't worry about that. We just have a jolly good chat about things.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's one of those things. It never goes away, this idea that, because the word expert gets thrown around so much, right? I can't remember if I introduced you as a VDI expert or whatever, but it's a word that I always shy away with because it sets such a scary precedent. You know, you're the expert in this, therefore, if I throw you a question, you have to be able to answer it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
it scares me away.
You get a lot of that. Yeah, there were always like the guru or the expert. You always get introduced as that, by your sales guys or that, and you kind of set yourself up for a fall. But it's
Exactly.
you kind of be asked to be as good as you can possibly get in that area. But you're never going to know everything. You know, it's especially on a fast pace. You know, kind of technology such as Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365 and Intune.
Yeah,
there's so many different areas that gets touched into. You kind of like you can't know everything, and it's impossible to do that. But
but you're expected to. You should do. That's
yeah.
You can tell I've just been watching the IT crowd. I've just been watching the IT crowd on Netflix for probably the 17 millionth time. I was like, have you tried turning it off and on again?
Yeah.
Was that a decent Irish accent?
I was going to say, can you do that in the cloud? You know, just turn it off and on again.
Deallocate and start VM is probably as good as you're going to get, but
it doesn't have the same ring to it, does it? You know, have you tried deallocating and reallocating it? Confession time though, I've never really watched the IT crowd or the X crowd or whatever. Yeah, I don't know, just never. I don't know why it just never crossed my viewing.
Yeah, I loved it back in the day. I don't think I've seen it in reruns, but back in the day it was quite funny because it kind of honed truths quite a lot about like as a network guy in the dungeon and stuff like that. But yeah, it's great, that sort of stuff.
Such a good show. If you got Netflix, it's on there. Highly recommend you check it out, mate. It's
maybe need to go back to it.
It's top stuff.
How long ago was it? Because it's probably venturing into that kind of classic territory, right? Because it's obviously not, you're not going back to, it's not the Faulty Towers era of stuff, but it's got to be like what, a couple of decades
early 2000s, I think, something like that.
Yeah, it goes so quick. What I think is it's only 5 years ago. It's like 15, 20 years ago. So you kind of like go.
But I've just been watching it through on my laptop, just opposite side of the room to my wife, and I've just been, as the acronym goes, I've been ruffling. Rolling on the floor laughing randomly at this show. It's just so funny. So I could probably just go and watch it again now. Really, really funny.
You get the finger out and watch it. Did it have a long run? Because obviously a lot of these classics, they kind of They came out with a bang and then disappeared after like 1 or 2 seasons.
I had 4 series and then a final 1 episode finale, which was not that long ago. It was 2013, which to me seems like yesterday, but it's like eight or so years ago now, isn't it? So
yeah, that is scary. It's like I just in the back of my mind I think of like, Windows Server 2008 R2 only just coming out.
Yeah, it's definitely end of life, that one.
Yeah, sure is. So I guess, let's just let's get into the fun stuff, if I dare say it. That'll probably scare off a few folks. But obviously the big news this month is that Windows 365 became generally available. I guess where I'd kind of like to start talking to you about that is my background starting off my career in internal IT within the small to medium-sized business space, and we never really had that requirement for VDI. So I guess the first thing that comes to mind is, when are the appropriate use cases that someone should be looking into something like Windows 365 or AVD or WVD? Because I see security being thrown in there a lot as a reason. But at the same time, in the back of my mind, I'm also thinking, well, if the host PC that I'm accessing VDI on isn't secure, how can that still be secure? So I'm just curious, when do you kind of steer folks in that direction or away from it?
So, I mean, I used to work with a lot of legal customers who had what was case management systems. So they're kind of all their records and everything went onto these case management systems. And latency was a massive problem. So as people started to migrate their workloads, latency became a real big problem, which is where the VDI kind of, Azure Virtual Desktop, or what I used to do was Citrix in the cloud, came into their own, because you're using a machine effectively next to the data. Whereas if you're using a VPN and going and connecting in that way, latency really does cause issues. And especially, with case management systems that were designed back 80s, 90s, where, none of this was ever thought of. Right. That's where you see, and also from compliance point of view. So if you don't want users on their desktops being able to take data out of a system, that's where that virtual desktop comes into, because you can lock it down. Things like don't access the keyboard, don't access the clipboard, don't access camera, drives, etc., etc. So it's like a contained environment, and that's where a lot of people kind of see that use case for virtual desktop environments.
Right. That makes a lot of sense, especially the latency piece, because I guess as you're seeing folks make that move to the cloud, folks talk about it and saying, well, you shouldn't just lift and shift, you should draw back and use platform as a service and software as a service where possible to replace stuff, so that latency, because you're working with internet first solutions, it doesn't matter. But my guess is that's not the real world, right? And you are going to have cases where we're lifting and shifting infrastructure into Azure infrastructure, and therefore we need to reduce that latency. Is that the kinds of reasons that you're saying?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, you want to go far away from virtual machines as absolutely possible, to the kind of SaaS web-based model that you don't really need anything. It's all kind of asynchronous connections. So, internet doesn't really matter. But legacy systems, a lot of businesses do have a lot of legacy systems that you need to be able to use them, and also use them until you get something else. And obviously, when COVID came along, there was a massive need for people to get what they've got and get up and running, and that's a big driver. And now in the hybrid world, we still see that that people aren't going to change their systems overnight, so they're going to need something that will give them almost like a halfway house until they go to that SaaS model, if they got the appetite for it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I guess when COVID hit and you've seen the sudden demand for cloud-based VDI and things like that, is that typically from customers that had an on-prem VDI, or is this going to be brand new to them?
It was a bit of a mixture, really. I mean, before COVID hit, there was that move to the hybrid world anyhow. So people were starting to use Microsoft 365 a lot more. But as soon as that pandemic hit, the people who needed to get up and running to run their businesses, really required something to get them working. And kind of what was the Windows Virtual Desktop came at the right time, because it just not that long come onto the market, and then bang, it hit, and demand straight through the roof.
Yeah, makes sense.
And those deployments that you did in early pandemic times, Paul, are you finding that they were done in such a way that you're now having to go back to some of them, and maybe certainly in this compliance world, security and compliance world, deploying things like Teams, I found that let's just get it out there because we need it. Was there any sort of parallel with WVD, and where you're now going back now that the customers have got the time to do it properly?
So when actually I started deploying it, it was almost like a different system, really. So when Windows Virtual Desktop first came out, it was PowerShell based. So the old, what was the Windows Virtual Desktop, it's called Classic now, was what was being deployed. So everything was managed via PowerShell. So adding users was PowerShell. You couldn't add groups, but to create the host pools, you had to do it with PowerShell. And then just over a year ago, I think it was June last year, that kind of started to change to the ARM template, the ARM method, and from there that's changed, and it changes every month. So it's not just ones that were originally put in very first. There's some changes that you kind of have to make as the service goes along. Really, it changes so fast that what you couldn't do before, or you wouldn't have done that method before, actually is possible.
That must be quite frustrating for some customers, in a sense, that they've just put out this latest and greatest piece of technology, and then boom, it's out of date already. But that's nothing new with Microsoft, is it?
No, yeah, it's a moving goalpost, but a lot of it is from customer demand. So you look at things like, even with the teams within the virtual desktop environment, that's changed purely because of customers have really requested it. What would have sat for 12 months, is massively shrank their timeline, and then they put it out, and then there's a new feature that goes. So it's built by, it's driven by customer need.
I guess, again, coming from a place of ignorance with almost all things VDI, it's with AVD and WVD. That's not Microsoft's first venture into this ability to kind of do VDI and accessing it through RDP. What is the kind of legacy of that? Because before WVD, what was the alternative with regards to on-prem or even through Azure?
Yeah, so when it first, when you first started doing it, it was RDS was your go-to, really. That was your, even if you were on-prem or in Azure, that was kind of it. Or if you went third party, Citrix or Horizon Cloud or one of the others that kind of built on top of what was RDS. Then Microsoft kind of back in 2017, early 2018, they looked at refactoring all of these services, and it was going to be called RDMI, which is Remote Desktop Modern Infrastructure. So actually, I went to a tech community show, and Freak Burson was doing a kind of a almost like a 10-minute in the corner on what was RDMI, and he was showing, it's effectively the web interface, the gateway, and the broker was going to be made into app services, and then you would deploy RDS that way. And it went into private preview. I tried to get on it, and it went very quiet. And Microsoft obviously, kind of got feedback from the community and said, Microsoft, you really should be providing a proper VDI solution, and that's kind of where Windows Virtual Desktop was born, really. And at the time, there was the demand for Office 365, Exchange Online and OneDrive came into its own, and the RDS, which was server based, wasn't really fit for purpose. So if you were deploying systems on-prem or in Azure, you would have either done it as RDS, which is server-based, pretending to be a desktop,
right,
or Windows 10 dedicated single session, which was the traditional VDI. So if you look at VDI, you're effectively Windows 10 single session machines, lots of them. But they're kind of Microsoft. They went back to the drawing board and actually came up with that Windows 10 multi-session in Azure, and that was a key driver then. So that became part of that Windows Virtual Desktop. So you had the Windows Virtual Desktop service, which Microsoft provide, which is the broker, the gateway, and the web interface. And then you've got that Windows 10 multi-session machine. And actually, also at the same time they acquired FS Logics. So it all kind of came together as this Windows Virtual Desktop, and that's what you kind of see now is that Windows Virtual Desktop. When they talk about it, it's actually like the 3 different areas. And if you look at Citrix and Horizon, if they build on Windows Virtual Desktop, they're actually building on the Windows 10 multi-session.
So for the
FS Logics.
For the benefit of people who may not know, what is FS Logics and what does that do?
Including me.
So FS Logics is a system for doing profiles. So if you worked really old times in RDS, you used to have roaming profiles, which when you logged on, copy all your profile down. And when you logged off, copy it all back up. Now, as your profile got bigger, log-on times slowed down, and it's like almost became unusable, and you used to have to obviously clear out profiles. Microsoft had their own solution, as well as third parties had their own solution, which was, so effectively you get a virtual hard disk, you get your profile, and it gets attached when you log on. So Microsoft had it, and it was I can't remember what even the system is, but it wasn't fit for purpose.
Right.
Citrix had Citrix profile management, but FS Logic had it, and they also had the ability to do things like OST indexing, and that's a big problem when you're working with Exchange Online. Is you need to be in cache mode, whereas that kind of goes against the kind of RDS where you want to be in online mode.
Yeah.
So, when you're starting to cache emails and searching on them, that didn't work either. So that's why the Microsoft one fell by the wayside. And FS Logic's kind of brought all that together, and it's a really nice system. And they almost give it for free now. So if you've got an RDS account, or if you've got a Windows 10 Windows 10 Enterprise, it's yours really. So
awesome.
anyone's using it.
So CALS was something I was going to ask about. Actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because in the old RDS RDP days, licensing, well, as it always is a bit of a dark art. It's hard to understand and be sure that you license correctly. Do you think that's getting any easier in the world of AVD, WVD, or is it still just as much a minefield as ever it was?
If you want to use the service, it's Windows 10 Enterprise, and how you get that, it depends on your licensing. So if you've got Windows 10 Enterprise on its own, standalone, yes, or VDA, yes. But if you've got Microsoft 365, E3, if you're in education, A3, then there's F3 also for frontline workers. That also gives you Windows 10 Enterprise. And there's obviously that quirky one that's the Microsoft 365 Business Premium, which also gives you the ability to use Azure Virtual Desktop.
Yeah, cool.
Just thinking, one of the things you mentioned earlier there was that one of the key differentiators between historic approaches to it and using AVD is the concept of Windows 10 multi-session. So I guess just to kind of understand that more fully, why would I be interested in multi-session? Is it so that I have less VMs running and folks can share the same hardware? Is that the kind of the key value in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're running VMs in Azure, you want to really fully utilize those, because you pay for the compute costs. So you don't want wasted compute because it costs you money. So effectively you want to maximize the users, obviously not to a point where you impact them, but if you've got single session machines, then there is some wasted capacity in there that spread that over hundreds of users can be lots and lots of machines that really you wouldn't want to pay for. And obviously if you're working normal office hours, that demand grows at the beginning of the day and throughout the working day, and then in the evening when demand shrinks, you just turn those machines off, have a minimum number of machines. Same with weekends, and you're only paying for the hard disk that you use, really, that's on the machines that are there, and then you're just paying for the capacity that you're kind of using at the time.
Okay, that makes sense, because it is one of the things, and you see it across all Azure services, not just AVD. You see it with things like Sentinel or VMs. It's because it's all charged kind of by resource usage by hour. So with AVD, if let's say I've got a process where the core business hours are, 8 a.m. till 7 p.m. Does that mean there's provisions there to automatically kind of turn the knob down and mean that there will be less resource I'm paying for overnight?
Yeah, you can utilize some of the Azure services to do that. So use Azure Automation and then schedule that with a logic app to kind of go in, check how many users are connected, how much capacity is needed. It's not brilliant. You do have to tune it to your workload. There are other systems that do it as a paid extra, but there are built in. You can kind of download the Azure Automation PowerShell script and then schedule that with logic apps. It's quite simple to set up. Microsoft make it quite easy now to do, whereas 12 months ago it was a lot more difficult to do, but now it's a couple of PowerShell commands, download the scripts, and it does pretty much it all for you.
I remember using Azure Automation, and I had a runbook in it where it would look at the tag of a virtual machine, and in that tag would have the hours that I wanted it to be online, and then it would check the tag and then do all that. But it sounds like it's a bit more, is it more mature now insofar as Microsoft will provide, because this was a kind of third-party runbook that I just found on the internet and took it for a spin, copy and paste it, and it worked. Is it more built in now, I guess, as far as helping folks reduce their usage?
Yeah, absolutely. It's in the documentation. So if you go to the AVD docs, there is that script, how to install it, how to set it up, and so they maintain that script, and they do update it as well if there's bugs. So it is a Microsoft produced script that they support.
That's one thing I like across all of Microsoft's technologies. Actually, the docs.com content is really
good.
Great. It's come a long way in the last few years, and it's spot. It's not always accurate. If our good friend Tony Redmond was listening, he would task me to point that out. So you do have to be careful sometimes what you repeat in blogs and such like. But on the whole, it's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. The Azure Virtual Desktop docs are probably one of the best I've ever seen. There's so much, for a wealth of information now, and then there's best practices, there's architectural guidelines on how to do, your FS Logic stuff, your scaling, your DR, all that sort of stuff. There's fantastic documents, and yes, there are always some that you think, I don't think that's right, and there's a win 5 docs, and I'll put a question in there to say, I don't think that's quite right there, but yeah. But
that I guess that kind of bridges on nicely then to Windows 365. It's not something I've had a chance to play about with much, but as far as hype goes, there's a lot of buzz around it, right? And I'm even seeing that filter across to the kind of mainstream media. I think was it CNBC I seen? They were talking about it, the kind of 24-hour news channels, albeit they're business focused. So I guess if I'm an AVD user at the minute, or if I'm just someone that's interested in should I be using VDI, how do I decide which to go ahead with?
So for Windows 365, that is a SaaS service, so it's really simple to set up. There's actually 2 flavors of Windows 365. There's a Windows 365 Business and a Windows 365 Enterprise. Okay. So the Business is very much a kind of cloud PC. You buy your cloud PC, you attach the license to the user goes to the portal, and effectively they've got a Windows 10 machine that, almost like buying, a Surface or anything like that, you buy the size of the machine as an Office or a Microsoft 365 license. So you just attach it to the user goes in, bang, off you go. Downside of that is if you want to connect to on-prem resources, that it's not built in for that sort of.
Right.
So there are some limitations. It's Azure AD joined, so you do get some management of that for Azure AD, but it's almost more limited. But actually, if you just want to provide them a PC in the cloud for people like contractors or third-party suppliers, you want to get them onto systems that you use, then that's fantastic. If you're born in the cloud and everything is SaaS based, then that's a fantastic system. But the business is like the Microsoft 365 Business. That's 300 seats maximum. Whereas the Enterprise is slightly different. They're actually hybrid Azure AD joined. So they're joined to a domain and Azure AD, and you can link it to an Azure VNet, so a virtual network. And then if you will need to connect to on-premise network, you can either use ExpressRoute or a VPN gateway. But that's the kind of 2 flavors. But rapidly to turn on and sell. But they are single session machines, so you don't get that benefit of the scaling, but you get that ease of provision. So actually, if you want to do a POC for Azure Virtual Desktop, then Windows 365 is a fantastic POC because the delivery method is the same. So they do use the Azure Virtual Desktop service to deliver the cloud PCs to users. So
so it's just like a kind of a layer of abstraction, I guess, on top of what is fundamentally AVD single session in the background.
Yes, with the Enterprise, the network cards are attached into your virtual network, but you've got all that Azure side that you want to kind of connect to. And it's purely managed completely by Microsoft, so it's a Microsoft managed subscription. With the business version, it's completely managed by Microsoft. You don't have anything to manage. You just give it a user, off you go. That's
and Windows 365. That's a monthly subscription cost compared to AVD, which is by consumption. So is there I mean, it probably differs, and it's probably not a simple question to answer, but there must be a kind of tipping point at which one is maybe more cost effective than the other.
There is, and actually there's been a good comparison done by a third party called Nerdio. You may or may not have heard. They specialise in doing like the management layer, adding value to AVD. But they've done some fantastic comparisons of cost of how much a cloud PC would be compared to how much it would be if you start doing things like scaling or do reserved instances. And it is quite interesting, really. I mean, obviously, if you've got a single session machine, you're gonna if you've got lots of them, that benefit of scale isn't Azure Virtual Desktop really.
Yeah.
But you've then got the cost of setting it up, running it, maintaining it. So it's kind of, there are use cases for both. But
yeah.
And
that makes sense.
When you say that this is interesting to me that you say Windows 365 would be a good POC for AVD. It's early days. Nobody will have had the time to do this yet. Do you foresee that transition if a business needed to do that? It would be simple to say, actually, Windows 365 not for us. We need to go AVD. Yeah,
I mean, if you've got the effectively the landing zone, the virtual network, the kind of domain controllers, and the bit that you require, then you've got pretty much what you'll need to start on that Azure Virtual Desktop journey. Obviously, there'll be extra bits that you'll want to do, things like profile management, because there isn't any of that in Windows 365. You've got things like backup, site recovery if you want to do DR, which you don't have with Windows 365, and you're looking at a more of a broader scale then as a system that is delivering desktops to your users.
Yeah. Like Rue, I've not tried Windows 365 just yet, but one of the things I'm really excited about when I do get to try it is that it's literally going to work on any device. I can use it on my Mac or potentially my iPad. So this is brilliant stuff. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, iOS, Android. There isn't one for Linux yet,
right.
But I think that's coming. But there are third-party kind of thin clients that have the client in there. So if you use those thin clients, they've got them. But Windows 10 IoT, even Chromebooks, if you're using, because they're Android, to get from the store. I wouldn't use it on an iPhone; it's a bit small, but iPad, absolutely.
On a decent sized iPad with a keyboard,
that's a good use case, definitely. Yeah, and one of the things that's interesting to me that you mentioned was the difference between the way business and enterprise handle the Azure AD join and the hybrid join. And I was aware of that distinction, but there's one thing interesting that you pointed out is that the enterprise, you're also associating it with a VNet. Therefore, you can have a persistent VPN to your on-prem resources. So does that mean on the business one, I really only have line of sight to the internet and there's no way I'm getting SM stuff? Is that right?
Sorry, so again, I missed the last second.
Yeah, sorry. I live in the middle of nowhere and I can see my internet's trying to punish me at the minute for it. So I guess the question is, if I've got business rather than enterprise, does that really mean that I'm only going to have line of sight to the internet? And as far as accessing any apps that are on my, my DMZ or my intranet, they're just going to be out of bounds. Is that right?
Well, I mean, think of it as a standalone PC. There's nothing stopping you from using third-party SSL VPNs or anything like that.
Sure.
But it's done on a client level rather than on a back-end level. So
Gotcha.
if you want users to have complete access to on-prem resources, the enterprise is really where you want to go, because there's less for them to do, and also less for setting up. With the enterprise, you can have images as well, so you can create your own image, put all your apps on, sysprep it, create your shared image gallery, and do all that. Whereas with a business, it's a marketplace image, Office, and that's about it really. Teams and build it all in, but it is a marketplace image, and that's as good as you're going to get.
And so Windows 365, it kind of lives in Endpoint Manager, doesn't it? So does that mean that all the devices are going to be enrolled in Intune and you can just push out apps, policy, all that kind of stuff as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Intune Endpoint Manager is kind of the way that it's all going towards. With Azure Virtual Desktop, when it first came out, most people were doing GPOs, that sort of thing, because it didn't support, Intune didn't support multi-session machines. That's starting to become more, there are some limitations around, how you're targeting policies. But with the hybrid, it's almost a mix really of where you're going to go. But you kind of take your choice really with them. But I do, people always ask, when can I get rid of my AD and have Azure AD joined, endpoint managed, and it is coming. It's coming for both AVD and for the enterprise.
Yeah, because I guess because you mentioned obviously the enterprise, that's going to need the hybrid join. If I'm a kind of cloud only organization and I don't have on-prem AD, can I use, and I'm going to butcher it, can I use Azure Active Directory Domain Services, or do I still need that physical? Because I'm aware that Azure Active Directory Domain Services isn't just on-prem directory services in the cloud. There's some subtle differences there, right?
Yeah, it is a bit quirky. There are some kind of almost weird stuff that goes on. You can't have machine in there, so you can't do things like single sign-on to Microsoft 365. For AVD, you can use it. It is a good use case, but the best way to do it is to do traditional domain and then do your AD Connect. That's most customers I work with use that. There are limited use cases that people do use Azure AD domain services, but it is a difficult one really. That it is a smaller use case because there's a lot of limitations that people don't quite like. But
one piece of technology, stroke terminology that I heard a lot of in recent times is Microsoft Always On VPN. Yeah, where does that fit into this picture? How would that get used in these scenarios?
Well, it's a client service really. So it's a Windows 10 feature. So that you could use Always On VPN to connect. It's whether you've got connectivity outbound over IKV2 or SSTP. It's effectively a Windows 10 machine. So
yeah, you could push it down through Intune or something, I'm guessing, right? So like if you had that Azure AD join device, I'm just kind of thinking in the back of my head, you could push out Always On VPN and therefore get your on-prem stuff, I guess. Thinking out loud here.
Yeah, I haven't done it myself, but I can't see it. There's an issue with doing so, but
throwing out ideas, different ways of doing things. But one thing I'm interested in, I've always described, and you mentioned before Citrix and VMware Horizon. I've always thought of Citrix in particular as the Betamax to Microsoft's VHS of RDP. How do you think the strides that Microsoft have made with WVD, AVD, Windows 365 will affect the Citrix story and what they're doing?
It is a difficult one, but they do add value. It's whether they add enough value for the cost that they do. So if you're doing things like, if you don't want persistent machines and you want machine creation services, or you've got an on-prem Citrix or Horizon and you want to kind of merge them together and use Azure Virtual Desktop for kind of DR for your on-prem, that's where they add quite a bit of value really. So you kind of got that Citrix workspace where you can do SaaS apps and your desktops and all that unified desktop. So they do add value. It's whether you add enough value to warrant the cost. And especially there's quite a few of the new players that are doing the management side of the AVD on top of it. So people like Nerdio who do most of what you want, and then if you don't need the kind of on-prem, if you're born in Azure Virtual Desktop and you want a management layer that will kind of provision machines quickly, do all your profile and all that sort of stuff, then
these are your MSPs, your managed service providers.
Yeah, I mean, if you're managing multiple customers, they do that sort of thing as well. So it's, and the cost is the per seat. But whether whether your systems are big enough to support or to warrant that need, it depends on how big you are and what you need to do as a management layer. But I always try and go native as much as possible.
For sure. Yep.
It's when you start to go into I want to do this or I want to do that, and then the third parties are kind of niche players in that market.
Yep. One thing that kind of jumped out to me when I was reading through the docs and seeing it on Twitter with regards to the security of Windows 365 is that by default users are local admins, at least in the enterprise environment. And Microsoft said, well, this is great news because it means your users can go and install the apps they want, which is kind of also not so great news if you're if you have any kind of common sense at all. I guess the question that leads me on to is, in the back of my mind, that's a weak spot and they need to improve on that. Are there any other kind of weak spots that you think within AVD or within Windows 365 that should be covered by Microsoft with first-party options rather than having to go to those third-party solutions?
I mean, a lot of the questions around security, you know, that local admin. If you're business, if you're Windows 365 business, that's your users have to be, otherwise you can't install the apps. You know, there's no management really.
Okay.
But you with the enterprise, you can kind of turn it off from within Intune. I mean, from Microsoft's point of view, I would always say conditional access is a massive one. A lot of users get that as part of the Microsoft 365 bundle, but really it's a necessity these days because username and password, it's just not good enough really. I mean, it doesn't matter how good your username and password is. I would say that, you know, MFA, conditional access, is imperative really for good security. Obviously, once you're in the machine, security is not less of an issue, but you know, locking things down. Azure Virtual Desktop, you can do that for good policies and
completely amen to that, my friend. And identity is the new security perimeter in this modern workplace world, really, isn't it? And you've got to put MFA on. Just please do it. At the very least, do MFA.
And decent endpoint security with you know, getting rid of these kind of the crypto locker stuff. So make sure you've got something that supports really good anti-crypto. Because you know that's a big thing. If you've got machines that are accessing the internet, you know, you kind of got to protect them there as well, because you know you don't want them cryptoing on-prem company data if they're in the cloud. But it's the same thing as on-prem really. It's no different if you're in the cloud than when you're working on-prem really. The kind of the user's normally the weakest link.
Yeah, it's a good point. You know, cloud isn't just a magic wand that you wave at something and all of a sudden it's secure, right? We still need to take into account all the practices that we've been employing on-prem and apply them in the cloud. And it's a little bit different because an Azure AD joined device has less ability to kind of hop from device to device than an on-prem joined device. But you see a lot of the marketing that's thrown around there by the guys in Redmond, all due respect to them, and it's a little bit too heavy on the marketing stuff, you know what I mean? Just because it's in the cloud or it's a TPM thrown at it, that doesn't make it secure, right? There's a whole bunch of other best practices you need to follow.
Yeah, I mean, your things like your TPM stuff I saw the weakness on that Windows 365 article, and if you've got admin access to a machine, you know, getting access to passwords isn't that difficult. You can do with Azure Virtual Desktop effectively what they are is Hyper-V VMs. So you've got almost the two types of VMs. So you've got the kind of classic ones, which what most Azure VMs are, and then you've got the ones which do the kind of secure boot and all that sort of stuff. There are a few quirks, and it's not quite the same. But the generation 1, generation 2, you do have that generation 2 ability to do that in Azure Virtual Desktop. So you kind of get around those sort of issues. Not to a full extent with the TPM and that, but it's
It was one thing I wondered, because obviously with Gen 1 to Gen 2, and I have no idea how this is working, I'm just spitballing here. I guess it's in my head when I'm thinking that things such as BitLocker and disk encryption, they're going to be using that TPM. And if I'm in a virtualized environment, well, what happens when my VM is bouncing from hardware to hardware and the TPM's not falling with it? So I don't know how that works. Hopefully someone smarter than me knows.
Slightly different. So that actually uses like Key Vault. It's almost attaches that key. It's called, there's like BitLocker encryption key, and it's like key encryption keying. So there's like Beck and Keck, and they attach almost like a CD drive or a virtual, and they have the key in there that comes from the Key Vault. Right. So that's actually been around for quite a long time. You know, they are effectively Azure VMs. So you know, you've had that ability to encrypt machines, but it's not quite the same as a hardware TPM.
Gotcha. So the kind of equivalent of the TPM securing the BitLocker keys within Azure is, well, rather than losing a TPM, we're using Azure Key Vault to store and then transmit that decryption key.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Learn something new every day.
TPM always seems to cause issues in various areas of Microsoft 365. I know, and it's been a while since I played with Autopilot, but I know with hybrid Azure AD joined devices, it could cause issues with Autopilot scenarios. So I don't know if it's come on since then, but it always seems to be the culprit, though, doesn't it?
Yeah. White glove as well. It can cause a lot of problems to do with device attestation and all that kind of stuff. White glove in general, my God.
Stuff like that, it's like TPM 1.2 and TPM 2,
And of course, now it's mandatory, right? As of Windows 11, you need that TPM 2, or at least a virtualized version of it. I'm actually in the middle of researching and writing an article for Practical 365 on it, and I don't think you can argue that there's quite a lot of benefits to TPM, but when I take a step back and I look at what are the daily and the most significant threats that the majority of customers are facing, TPM maybe not the most prioritized thing. You know, customers would benefit a lot more if we disabled macros by default, you know, things like that, rather than worrying about TPM. It's important, but maybe slightly exaggerated.
Limiting ability to put things in there kind of temporary and run them from there, and you know, just kind of locking things down from there. I mean, app lockers are a perfect example of other stuff. You know, that the easy wins that TPM is probably harder. I mean, if you look at a lot of on-prem VDI, they probably don't have BitLocker enabled VMs, and I mean, it is a problem with virtualized environments. So, you know, if you can get access to the hypervisor, you can almost take that machine. If you were to domain controller, you take the database. If you've got rainbow tables, you can kind of extract all those stuff from there. So it is an issue. I'm not sure if it's as much of an issue as people kind of make out from these hyperscale. But you do get, I think there's an actual SKU that you can use with like a trusted computer model that's a VM type, so that combats all that as well. So
and to be fair, I think when they tried Windows 10 mode, that was kind of promising. You know, it was, insofar as it have to come from the App Store, it was really using application control in the background to, I guess, benefit from that security philosophy that platforms like iOS have, where the store is a trusted place and therefore there's just some inherent security that it's going through some auditing. But the Microsoft Store, at least in Windows 10 and 8, it didn't pick up. It wasn't treated like it should have been treated. Windows 11 Store, that looks a lot more promising insofar as There's more incentives for vendors to use it. And you don't have to stick to, Metro apps, as they were once called, right? You can upload anything to Windows 11 Store.
If they'd done that right from the get-go, we might still have Windows Phone system rather than those devices now being on Android. But, I mean, that's a whole other story, though. And I think the partnership with Android has been overall, it's been a really good move for Microsoft, I think.
Yeah, I seen a quote kicking about Twitter the other day, and it was saying, it was Satya at the time quoted saying, if the OEMs don't make Windows phones, we'll just make them ourselves. But obviously plans changed. because things are quite different now.
When you look at it is a shame. It is a shame, definitely. There's a lot of potential in that. But when you look at laptops, though, traditional clamshell laptops from your typical manufacturers, your Dells, your Lenovo's, your HPs, they're not really getting the message that Microsoft want the story to be told, because Microsoft are putting out Surface Pros, Surface laptops, etc., etc. The others are not really following suit. They're not going with the touch screens. They're not going with the hybrid devices. They're putting out laptops that still look like laptops that we've had for 20-odd years, maybe just a bit thinner and faster.
Well, in the Surface Book, that's one that's definitely not picked up, the detachable keyboard, with the external GPU. I haven't seen any OEMs develop anything like that.
No.
The Surface Pro, they've kind of had a stab at that. I know Dell do ones like that, but to be fair to the Surface lineup, that is very premium stuff, right? You're talking in the 4 figures rather than the 3 figures. And for a cheapskate like me, if I'm looking at my budget, I'm thinking £700 Dell laptop or £1,400 Surface Pro with the same spec. And I'm cheap, so I'm going to go with the Dell.
Yeah, and there is the argument that is Windows really a touchscreen platform anyway? Is it conducive to that? It is good when
It is good when you've got it, though. It just comes so naturally if you're scrolling through a document or something like that. As I point my finger at the screen like this, but it's it feels quite natural. But I
had a couple of Surface Pros. I had a 3 and a 4, and you're right, they were good for that. But I wasn't bothered when I lost those devices and went back to more traditional laptops, shall we say. But anyway, before we stop talking about Windows 365, there's one final thing I absolutely must say about that, is that I am so glad that it's now a thing, because I will no longer have to correct my family when they say to me, my Windows 365 is not working. That is not a thing. It is now. So thank God for that.
Not the right thing.
Yeah, the naming is always annoying, right? I feel like you're talking a different language to folks at times. And what's creepy is my wife, she'll be scrolling through Instagram now and she gets adverts for Microsoft 365. And it's like, well, that's a little bit creepy, but it's probably just because of me. You know what I mean? It's
that AI advertising stuff. It is really scary. I'm sure they're listening. I'm sure people are listening to our conversations. We had family round not long since a few weeks ago, and we're talking about a certain brand of coffee. We weren't even texting about it. We were just talking about it. And then literally 10 minutes later, we got an ad for it on the computer. It's like, what's all that about? Scary.
Yeah. They always say that, there's no listening. And I kind of believe that, but some of it is very creepy, the coincidences of these advertisements. But that said, my house is full of Alexas, so if they are listening to me,
my house is not like that. I'm completely opposite. As somebody who works in tech, my own home is
nothing to do with it.
Completely the opposite. I've got a few laptops and tablets and stuff, but I've not got any Alexas. I've not got any Internet of Things or controlling my lights, anything like that. I'm just not motivated to do it for some reason, and that's completely contrary to who I am as a person who embraces technology.
Yeah, it certainly makes shouting up to the kids a lot easier if you've got Alexas as well. I think I put too much insulation in our house. So it's just they don't hear you, so you kind of have to drop in on their room and kind of or make an announcement for dinner time. Otherwise, they just sit there and not answer at all. But it is good for that, and there are some downsides. But you kind of, if you look at, if you're on your mobile phone and searching for something, I was looking for making like a summer house and then all boom, adverts for summer houses, or looking for off you go. It's all targeted, very targeted now.
And the worst is when you keep getting adverts for something that you don't need to keep getting adverts for. So, for example, you'll search for vacuum cleaner because you need a new vacuum cleaner, and then for the next 3 months, it's like, here's all these vacuum cleaners, and it's like, well, I've already bought one, so stop. You don't need to keep nagging me. But yeah, so moving on from kind of VDI and all that kind of stuff, just kind of general questions about your IT career then, because I mean, one of the things we talk about in this show a lot is how folk get started, how things have changed over time. Was IT has that always been your profession? Is it something that always interested you? And how did you kind of end up where you are just now?
So, I mean, I was one of those kids in the 80s that had the Atari, and kind of, I used to buy magazines that used to have the coding. So when I was little, I used to do coding on an older 8-bit Atari, and then obviously 16-bit. And so I've always been kind of into IT. I went to college, and from there, there was a guy who was in my class who had a Saturday job in a computer shop, like the American call them mom and dad computer shops, but they're effectively family business, IT shop. And so he was leaving to join a band, and he said, "Is anyone interested in kind of going working on a Saturday?" And I thought, well, actually, I could do with the money. So I started doing that when I was 17 in a computer shop, building PCs, fixing PCs, and I kind of almost dropped into that. So at the end of my college course, I couldn't really afford to go to university because I had to kind of self-support myself. So I kind of just took the easy option of going in full-time job, and it kind of went from there really. So I spent 10 years there doing, various roles, going up in the career, workshop manager, kind of, building up from there. Then I joined a managed service provider after that. And then I joined a startup, which my first love is Exchange. So Exchange Online. Exchange was before Exchange Online. Actually, I did hosted Exchange.
Oh, cool. So
I joined a company who were then bought out by which then became Outsourcery. So they were kind of doing hosted Exchange, hosted SharePoint, hosted lots of Skype for Business. So I actually kind of started there and did all their hosting, and kind of did their Exchange 2007 hosted infrastructure. And I left there because it was very much a startup, and it was very, very, it's a lot of hard work, because startups, you kind of, there's less staff, but they got purchased. But they've kind of gone to the wall because the Microsoft snowball, and you kind of see that Office 365, so outsourcing no longer exists. But so I left there because my son was born. And I kind of took a bit more of a step back. Still doing Exchange, I was an Exchange administrator for a corporate. And then the kind of, the big recession, 2008 hit. They got really hit hard with number of users. They kind of almost halved their business. And then kind of it got a bit like I was almost doing not enough to keep me busy. Because once you've built an Exchange environment and it's kind of running, it kind of, ticks along. But I like to be busy. So I went back into managed service provider, kind of, and then that specialised in legal. So I was doing, on-prem and VMware, kind of Citrix, all that sort of stuff. And cloud was very in its infancy, and because I specialised in legal, at the time there was no Azure UK data centres, so there was one in Northern Europe, Western Europe, but none in the UK. So I called James Ackrig. He used to work at Microsoft. He came to see us, and he talked to us about private cloud. And I kind of got into the hosting and the cloud bit from the private cloud. So it was Azure Pack. It was actually built on System Center. So it actually looked like Azure, but wasn't Azure. It was almost the predecessor to Azure Stack. So it looked like old. If you Azure, it's the ASM model. So it looked like
Service Manager, right, or Service Management, something like that.
Like that. It was the real classic.
Yeah.
Visual. It was built on that. And then as the UK data centers kind of came on board, a lot more customers started to use, especially Office 365. And then there were some quirks about licensing with using Office 365. So we kind of made that business decision to start going Azure. And that's, that's kind of where I've come. And then I came, started where I am at the moment, which is Softcat. And I joined just before the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
So I started in March, and because I started, doing Windows Virtual Desktop beforehand, I was, kind of always very busy. I've been very busy ever since. But yeah, so that's my kind of career. Nice. 25 years in the kind of making. So yeah, 25 years I've been doing it this year, I think.
Good stuff. And I'll skip the easy question, which is, and what's the biggest change? Because the change is constant, and it's kind of obvious what the biggest changes are. It's all to do with cloud and everything. I guess as far as what excites you about the future then, because you look at Azure, right, and it's kind of crazy. It's so big. There's so much to it. What's some stuff that you're interested in and that you might be aware of that is kind of, and maybe in its early stages that you think might be exciting and useful going forward?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, Azure's massive, really. You kind of have to put your kind of flags in the sand to say, this is what I love, and this is what. The good thing about working with AVDs, it touches loads of different areas. So you've got the kind of the Azure files and the networking and the kind of logic apps and stuff like that. I mean, I personally think hybrid is still massive. Azure Arc is, I think, going to be a big one. Sentinel's, security is always massive as well. Sentinel seems to be a big kind of driver that people, want to have that central scene. Sure. But yeah, I mean, using log analytics and stuff like that is really key. If you told me sort of 12, 18 months ago would have been writing like KQL queries, I would say what the heck you on about, but that seems to be massive, really. And you see that from the security side as well as the kind of the Azure Monitor, even into the Arc. So those sort of areas, I think hybrids always Microsoft used to say, go to cloud, and now they've definitely changed their tune, and now they're definitely saying hybrid is definitely.
Totally. Well, there's too much business in it to ignore it, right? And I think that's a problem with a lot of the other public clouds like Google and Amazon, is they're all in on cloud, whereas Microsoft have definitely got that niche of the hybrid environment, right? Because they understand that legacy of enterprise IT, that at big scale, as much as we say we want to go cloud first, and as much as that's encouraged, it's going to take a long time, right? If you've got an established business that's got 20 years of legacy IT at any great scale, you can't just flick a switch and it's there. You're talking, 5 years, 10 years for that kind of journey to happen.
Definitely. And the sort of firms that you have dealt with in your career, Paul, legal firms, I've spent a bit of time working with legal firms. They are a particular example of organizations that have a lot of legacy systems and processes and plugins, and it's just not as easy as, right, we're going cloud. It's got to be planned very, very carefully and slowly, and it's going to be quite a long journey for them.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
And firms of that type definitely quite risk and change averse, and understandably so, right? They've got to be very cautious.
Yeah, they are very regulated industries.
Yeah.
So compliance is a big issue for them.
Yeah, but there's a hell of a lot in this pot for all of us, though. I mean, I'm thinking back to when I first started specializing in Office 365, as it was called then, Microsoft 365 now, whatever they're calling it this week. And and I used to describe myself as an IT generalist throughout my career who now specializes in Office 365. But you can't even say that anymore, because people then say, well, what do you do? Do you do Teams? Do you do security and compliance? Do you do AVD? Do you do Power Platform, which is massive? There are so many opportunities for IT professionals to specialize in these different areas within the platform. So it's a great time to be involved in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at the AVD, even Microsoft trying hard to pigeonhole where that sits, because if you look at the roadmap, it's on the M365 roadmap, and yet it's called Azure Virtual Desktop.
Yep.
But it ties into like Intune, it will, and it ties into Microsoft 365, and that the times you can really get excited about one area and actually make that your niche. Really, it is a fantastic time for people to kind of put their flag in the sand and say, this is me.
Yeah. One of the things I like to do as well is, if you go on the M365 maps by Aaron Dinage, the kind of licensing guide, and you just go to the Microsoft 365 E5 one, and it shows you the whole shebang. And it's like, there's a lot to this thing, especially when you consider that when we talk about Microsoft 365, we're also kind of talking about everything to do with Windows, right? That kind of sits within that. And then also the whole endpoint manager stack sits within there. And it's just, like you said, you have to take your flag and say, this part of it is mine, right? And you can be a generalist about all of it, but there's no way you could be a specialist in all of it.
Yeah.
Not at all. No.
And I didn't even mention messaging exchange. I mean, email.
Yeah, blindly.
That was really the core of Office 365 when I first got into it. It was at that time, it was really at its beginnings. It was Office applications in the cloud, the Office 365 Pro Plus, and Exchange Online were the two things that sort of I started working with in it. Messaging ain't my favorite thing these days. I try and avoid it as best I can in favor of other things like Teams But
you're spot on though, because messaging and Exchange Online, that really was the gateway drug for a lot of cloud stuff, right? For a lot of businesses. I mean, before Office 365, or even at the very embryonic stages of Office 365, a lot of businesses would have been like, nah, no way, cloud stuff, putting my data in other folks' warehouses, forget about it. But then, just because of how good and reliable O365 turned out to be, it's really the genesis of all the change, quite frankly, when you look at it.
Yeah, it is most people's on-ramp still, really, to the rest of it. I mean, obviously, with pandemic, Teams has been a big driver. And then the kind of hybrid, get Exchange Online hybrid to enable Teams. And then, people have kind of had that Exchange 2010 end of life. They need to get 2016 hybrid, and that's enabled that. So yeah, there's that has been a lot of people's on ramp, which is who now really would run Exchange. Not many people would run Exchange on prem themselves unless they're using it just as a management portal, really.
Yeah. If you're greenfield, and unless you have some very, very niche requirement like air gapping and stuff like that, you'd be kind of bonkers to start thinking, okay, well, first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up on-prem Exchange, right? Like you said, just because even just the security element of it, securing email is not easy, especially given the last year we've had, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, no way.
No, I wouldn't want to be doing that these days. And thankfully, you don't get too many requests for it. You do occasionally get a few customers in the wild saying we want Exchange 2019, and then what? No. But anyhow, fun and games. But want to talk a little bit about you more, Paul, before we wind things up. And what do you like to do in your spare time? What are your hobbies outside? I mean, everyone who comes on this show talks passionately about Microsoft 365 and Azure in some way, shape, or form. But what are your other interests and things that you like to do in your spare time?
I mean, I've got 2 kids, so taxi is really, one good thing about the pandemic is I've been able to take my daughter to school, so that's really great. Before it'd be I've got to commute beforehand, and then get back in time. But that's most of the thing is really DIY for decorating and kind of building. We bought a house kind of a couple of years ago, needed artwork, so that takes up a lot of time. But in my spare time, I like to grow veg.
Oh wow!
Nice.
Yeah, veg and kind of the allium. I like alliums, so onions, leeks. But I also like ornamental ones. So there's big pom alliums. The ornamental sort of stuff. I love those sort of things. So a bit weird, but.
No, it's cool. And do you find that it tastes better, not just because you put the time and effort into it, but like literally, does it taste better because it's fresher?
Garlic. I grow a lot of garlic, and that's certainly stronger than what you'd normally buy in the shop. This year has been a significantly good year for crops, purely because of the weather's been kind of warm but moist.
Yeah.
So things have gone crazy this year. I think I'm sick of courgettes. I do far too many courgettes. And if you've never grown courgettes, they're either nothing or there's tons of them, and we've got absolutely tons of them this year. But they're different to what you buy normally in the shop, and obviously you normally buy just green courgettes, and that's about it. But there's all sorts of shapes and flavors and stuff that you get. We've had kind of carrots and broccoli, and just
nice.
this year's been just nuts.
That's cool. Good. Yeah, we've always thought about having like a wee greenhouse outside. You know what I mean? Kind of grow that kind of stuff. Yeah, interesting. I'll maybe hit you up when the time comes. Get some advice. Send you pictures of my dying plants.
It's really good to see. You kind of growing stuff. It's really good for your kind of mental well-being. That it is nice to see what you've produced and you think, oh, blooming heck, I've done that. It's a great achievement. So
yeah, definitely. And do you have that in your garden, or have you got an allotment? How do you grow stuff?
Luckily, I've got a big enough garden to have raised beds. So
cool. Because allotments are like way popular these days, aren't they? Like more popular than ever. Loads of people I know seem to be getting allotments.
Yeah, I used to have an allotment, but there are a lot of hard work. It's a surprisingly big amount of land that you kind of have to get. And as a new allotment owner, you tend not to get the best plots. So it's to get up and running. It is quite hard work. It is very rewarding. You can almost feed your whole family from that size. I mean, that's what they were originally designed for. But it is hard work. Getting on top of the weeds is the hardest.
Yep.
Yeah, awesome stuff. And from a DIY point of view, have you got any projects on the go at the minute? Anything interesting you're doing with the house or plans?
So I mean, during lockdown, I built the bathroom, so from scratch. Literally, I think every wall in our house has been taken back to brick.
Wow,
nice.
Plasterboard, plumbing, pretty much everything's from scratch. And luckily, I've kind of started from the top and went all the way down. So the bedrooms are done, the bathroom's done, the lounge is done, the dining room's done. Now it's the really expensive bits, but it's kitchen and utility room, and that's going to be a bit more tricky and dare say a lot more expensive.
Oh, yeah, money.
Yep.
But well done, though. Top stuff. And Rue and I are often chatting to each other that we are not of that mindset. We are not DIY handy people. And so if you ever consider doing it as a side hustle, let us know. And
a couple customers. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's necessity more than more than pleasure.
Yeah.
So I guess to wrap up the show here, we need to ask you the obligatory question that every guest gets. Because I'll tell you one thing, the ones that don't care about fruit and veg are Cyberdyne Systems. And the question is, Terminator 1 or Terminator 2, which is the better film?
Well, for me, obviously, I kind of came at the right time for Terminator 2. So I was kind of the same age as kind of Edward Furlong at the time. So, and I was a bit rebel without a clue. So for me, Terminator 2, because it was at the right time. But
Nice.
yeah, they're still, they're both fantastic films in different ways. But me, Terminator 2.
Yep. Nope. Right answer.
Yeah. We haven't had a 2 in a while, have we?
No, we haven't. No.
It was getting a bit worrying.
It's just such a good movie. It's well, we've spoken about it for 21 episodes now, talking about how good a movie it is. So yeah, that's right choice. You get back on the show. You can come back.
Absolutely.
So I guess as far as how folks want to find more about AVD, WVD, how can folks find you online? Places like Twitter, things like that.
So for my Twitter, it's at Paul Tozer. It's quite nice and simple. I didn't put it in the thing for some no reason, but yeah, at Paul Tozer for Twitter. And then most of my stuff, I use LinkedIn mostly as my professional profile. So you should easily be able to find me from there. It's a cartoony face of me. You pretty much, if you saw it, you'd see it's me.
Good stuff.
Yeah, by all means, connect on LinkedIn or follow me on Twitter. Lots of posts around Azure Virtual Desktop.
Yeah, you do share a lot on there, which is always good to see, because I learn a lot from you and learn a lot from you today. So thank you very much for giving us your time on what is a Sunday as we record this. So it's much appreciated. It's great to catch up with you again. We've not spoken in a while, so it's good to catch up and have a chat anyway. And so appreciate it. Thank you so much. So let's put this episode to bed, Roo? Let's
absolutely. Let's go. So let's see if I can remember this time. So what do we want you to do? Let's see. Like the video, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe to us on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, everywhere you can get us. Give us a thumbs up if possible, and retweet and all that kind of stuff. Help spread the news about the show. And give us feedback, let us know what kind of topics you're interested in, what guests you'd like us to have on, and we'll do our best to try and manipulate them and blackmail them into coming on the show. Yeah. That's how we got Paul.
Absolutely. Yeah. Is there anything different you'd like to see?
Absolutely.
Let us know. We are very open to feedback.
Yep. Cool. Okay. Well, we'll sign off for episode 21. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Peter, Paul, cheers. I'll see you down the road.
Catch you later. Take care.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.